Hello and welcome guys back to the next video, and in this video we want to dive into creating calculations as well as calculated columns and measures in Power BI. Now what can we do? Well, let's go to the sales table, and as you've already seen and used in another video is that Power BI by default is summing up or aggregating numerical values, so numerical columns in this case, like for instance the price as well as the quantity. You can see that there are these sum symbols, which simply means that it's simply summing up the whole column. Okay? And you can use this summation, of course. For instance, if I click on quantity and I visualize this, you can see by default I'm creating the bar chart. If I like to see the value, I either hover over the bar chart, or I can also select this, another visual. So let's switch this to a card, and we can see we got 21,000, 21K. Of course, if I go to the Format tab and want to see the real value, so go to Data Label here and say, instead of Display Units Auto, I simply select None, and then I can see it's exactly 21,078. Okay? So this is a quantity. And this is available by default, okay? Because Power BI is simply summing up the specific column as long as it is specified as a type of numerical column, okay? So a whole number or decimal number. All right, so what if we'd like to, well, calculate this, the quantity, for instance? So instead of using the, by default, aggregation, we can also calculate this. We can either do it with a calculated column or with a measure. Now in our case, let's go with a measure, okay? Let's go to modeling and select new measure, or go to home and also select new measure, okay? Both options are valid and do exactly the same. So if I select new measure here, you can see that this measure appears, and let me actually make this a little bit bigger and zoom in. Okay, measure. Now this measure will be the total quantity. Okay, so I can simply type in total quantity like that is equal to, and now I simply need to put in a formula, and I'm simply using an easy formula, simply the sum formula. Okay, all I do is specify sum, and then I need to give it a column name, and as you see what it does, it adds all the numbers in a specific column. Okay, so I simply select tab, and now I can select the specific column I like to have. In this case, it's quantity, so I simply type in QU, and you can already see I got different kinds of options here, and I want to have the last one in this case, which is sales table quantity. So from the sales table, use the column quantity, okay, and simply sum it up. Okay, so I can press tab again and close my parenthesis and press enter. Okay, and then I just wait until the measure gets created. You can see there it is, total quantity, and if I make this smaller again and zoom out maybe a little bit like that, I can use this measure now. All I do is I click on it, and you can simply see this little calculator icon here, because it's a measure that always appears if you have a measure, and you select it, and then you can see by default again it's a bar chart. But if I switch this to a card as well, go in here, you can see 21K, and if I go in here and then change basically the data label itself from the auto to the none, you can see I got exactly the same value as the default aggregation for the quantity. Okay, so this would be one option to do the same using a measure in Power BI instead of using the default aggregation. Okay, now this is a really easy application here for a measure, but measures are much more powerful, and you'll see this in later videos. Okay, so what else can we do? Well, beside measures, we also have calculated columns. Okay, so what I like to do when I create a calculated column, I go to the query editor. You can also do it here, for instance, if you go to the data view, you also have the option to create a new column here, for instance, or go to modeling. If you go to modeling and also create a new column here, you could also do it here, but I like to do it in the query editor. So I go to home and go to edit queries, and you can see the Power Query editor opens. Then all I do is click on refresh here for now, and I go to my sales table here, and then what I'd like to do is I'd like to, well, calculate my sales, right? Because currently in my sales table here, in the fact table, what I have is I have a quantity column and I have a price column. But what I don't have so far is the sales figure. So in this case, 2 times 1,178, right? So in order to do this, I can simply go to add column here, and then I can say I want to create a custom column. So I can select it, create custom column, and then I need to give it a name. So let's say these are my calculated sales, and I'm using calculate sales column, okay, for this measure for the column name. Okay, and then I can simply type in a formula here. So all I do is I'm referring to specific columns which are available in here. So you can see them here, and if I scroll down, you can see quantity. I can select it, and then I could click on insert now I have it. And all I want to do is multiply this specific value, the quantity value, times the price. So I can, again, click on the price and then insert, or you simply double click on price. Also works, okay? And you can see there is no syntax error. So obviously this formula works for the new column which we want to create. And basically what it does is simply using the value in the specific row from the quantity column and multiplies it by the price column. Okay, that's exactly what we need. So 2 times 1,178 is exactly the sales amount for this specific order. Okay, so we can click OK and just wait until it's calculated, and you can see we got the value in here. So 2 times this value is this value, and 1 times 123 is 123, and so on. So for each transaction, so each order. Now, what you also can see is we got a 1, 2, 3 and 1, 2, 3. So those columns are whole numbers. That's fine. However, you can see that the calculate sales column is by default not recognized as a numerical field. So you can see ABC 1, 2, 3. This always refers to the fact that Power BI has not recognized what kind of data type it is. So what you can do is you can either go to Home and then go to Data Type here and select the specific data type, or you just make your life easier and click on this little icon here and then simply select what kind of data type you want to have. For instance, I'd like to see this as a whole number, so I can say whole number in here. Okay, so you can see the values are still the same, but now I have used a whole number in here. Okay, change the data type. Okay, so far so good. Now also it has here recognized what we did. So basically we added the column and then we changed the data type. Okay, so if we like to go back to another step, you can see this was the step before, this was the step before, and so on. Okay, so all the steps are recorded in the query editor. That's why I like to do actually my transformations here in the query editor instead of doing it in the report view or in the data view. Okay, now I click on close and apply. So that's actually what we've done gets applied, and then the new column appears. And you can see here it is. And also it has this numerical icon here. The reason simply is because we switched the data type to a numerical field. Okay, otherwise it would probably not recognize this as a numerical field. All right, so we got this. So we can go back to our report view, and now we can simply use this. Okay, I can simply click on it. If I click on it, by default I get a bar chart. And if I now, for instance, take a look at the icon itself, so for a card, I can see I got almost 26 million. So if I like to see this, maybe if we go in here and say for the data label itself, again, not auto, but let's say none, you can see this is exact value. And if you like to see this or format this to a dollar amount, all we would do is go to modeling here and simply again select the specific column here, the calculate sales column, and then simply say, okay, these are US dollars. So I click on this icon here and say these are United States US dollars. Okay, and you can see that's the value. So almost 26 million in sales. Okay, like that. So this is the calculate column. Now this is one specific value. Now let's go back to our model view. Okay, so let's take a look what we did, right? So we created this kind of visualization, right? Or basically this kind of model here, the model structure. Now what we have is we have a one-to-many relationship, remember? And this simply means now we could use a specific dimension from one of our dimension tables up here to basically filter the sales table and get the specific value for the specific dimension. So what I mean by that, what we can do is we can now create a table and select the specific customer name we have and simply take a look, okay, what's the sales value which this customer generated, okay? So if we go back to our report view, what we can do is simply deselect this visualization, and now I'm using my customer. So where is it? Let's go here in my customer name. Here it is. I select my customer name, and I got my customer names, and I also make this already a little bit bigger. So go to values here, and then under values, I say the text size is maybe, let's say 14. Okay. Now I can see I got my list of my unique list of customer names, which I got here. So all my customers, and now if I select at first my table and then go to my calculated column, I can select it, and I can see now I got the specific sales value here for each different customer, okay? And the total value down here, which is exactly this value here, okay? Now, this is only possible, this kind of structure here, because we have set up this kind of model structure. So we know exactly we have a one-to-many relationship from the customer, so from this dimension table to this sales or facts table. And this simply means we could select a specific dimension, which is in our case the customer name. And for each customer name, we would like to filter our sales table to get only the sales amount for this specific customer. Okay, so if I go back to my view here, and this is exactly what happens here. All right. Okay, now this would be one option, so to create a calculated sales column. Of course, we could also do this using a measure. So if we go to modeling and create a new measure, or again, go to home and select a create measure here, I select new measure under modeling now, and then I make this bigger and zoom in a little bit, and now I name this my total sales, okay? And now say is equal to, and now I want to use another function, and this time an iterator function, which is a really powerful and often used function in DAX, okay? So all iterator functions are these end with an X, and the iteration simply means that here, what it does, returns the sum of an expression evaluated for each row in a table. This simply means that it goes through the specific table, in our case, the sales table, and for each row in the sales table, it evaluates the expression which we give into the sum function here, okay? And that's exactly what we need. So this is why the first argument will be, okay, which is a table where the expression should be evaluated? Well, it's the sales table, right? So refer to sales table. And what is the expression? Well, the expression is exactly the same as we have used in the calculated column. So it's simply the quantity in the specific column, in the specific row, sorry, and we multiply this by the price, okay? So simply type in price, and now you get Power BI, well, suggests you use the sales table price, which is exactly what you need. Simply press the tab, and then you can close this, and you can press enter, okay? And we got a total sales, and you can see the total sales again with this little calculator icon is created. So let's go in here. So again, I zoom out a little bit like that, and now I can use this as well. So instead of using my calculated column, I could simply select my table again and click on this total sales icon. Either I click on it, or I select the table again. I can either click on it, or I can simply drag and drop it here under values, okay? And you can see I get exactly the same value as I get here. So these are not formatted. So again, I select this total sales measure which I created and say maybe, okay, these are also United States dollars. So select it again and then go to US dollars here. So the format, and you can see I got exactly the same values. Okay, and also for the total, I also got exactly the same value. Okay, so this would be another option to using or to use a measure instead of a calculated column. Just one little thing I'd like to mention here. You can see I use a semicolon here. Now, if you use an English version of Power BI, you probably have to use a comma instead of a semicolon. Okay, in general. This is for all the measures which we create. So in German version, for instance, I use the semicolon is used, but in English language versions, I think the comma is used, or at least most of them, which I know. Okay, it's simply that you be aware of that. All right. So that's that for for creating a measure as well as a calculated column. And you can see that both options are possible. However, most of the time, I would probably advise you to use measures instead of calculated columns. The reason for this is simply storage. Okay? Because if you have a really big model, then if you create a calculated column, you need to be aware that this requires additional storage. The measure itself does not require much additional storage because the measure is actually calculated on the fly. So all these values which you can see here, or if you go in the data view here, which you can see here, all these values have to be stored within this table for the calculate column. But for the measure, the total sales measure, that does not exist. It only exists as soon as we use it within a visualization, and only then it will be calculated. Okay? So this is the reason why measures are not as well storage intensive as calculate columns. And this is why if you have a big model with a lot of data, you like to use you like to use measures instead of calculate columns. If you have a small data set like we have here, then basically it doesn't matter. But just to be aware of that. Okay? So that's it for this video. So it was a long video, but hopefully you understood everything. In case you got any questions, of course, feel free to ask them. And as always, thanks a lot for watching, your interest in the course, and hopefully see you in the next video. Until then, best guys.